The Arkansas River ran brown and heavy in September of 1853, carrying silt from the Rockies and deadfall timber from the Ozark Highlands, moving with the slow determination of a body of water that had been carving this particular path for 10,000 years and saw no reason to change. Angus Thorne stood waist-deep in the shallows, wrestling a felled oak toward the bank, his red beard plastered to his jaw, his arms aching with the particular ache of a man who had been cutting timber since dawn and would continue until it was too dark to see the axe. He was 32, built like the trees he cut, thick-trunked, straight, with hands that could close around a 6-inch branch and squeeze sap from it. Scottish by birth, American by accident, his family had emigrated to Boston when he was 9. He'd moved west at 19 because Boston was too small and too full of people who wanted him to work indoors. And he'd ended up on the Arkansas River because the timber was dense and the competition was thin. If the story of a lumberman who built a home for a Quapaw stranger and the royal dowry fleet it summoned fascinates you, subscribe now. What this forbidden love costs will change everything you think about belonging. His lumber camp was a clearing on the north bank, a work yard of felled logs, a drying rack, a pit saw, and a sleeping lean-to that was barely adequate shelter for a man and entirely inadequate shelter for a man's loneliness. Angus Thorne could build anything from timber. He could not build a life from timber. The distinction haunted him. I'd built 6 cabins for other men's families, 6 homes with fireplaces and door frames and window shutters. I'd built them and walked away and slept in a lean-to that wasn't good enough for a hound. A man who builds houses for everyone else and lives in a shed is either very generous or very afraid of what he'd put inside a house of his own. The storm arrived at dusk, a September-line squall that came across the river like a grey curtain, dropping the temperature 20 degrees in 10 minutes and turning the rain from drizzle to assault. Angus was stacking timber when she appeared, walking up the river trail, soaked through, carrying a bundle wrapped in elk hide, and moving with the unhurried pace of a person who had been rained on before and did not consider it a personal insult. Quapaw. He knew the dress patterns. The river traders wore them. She was perhaps 28, tall, with the direct gaze of a woman accustomed to being looked at and uninterested in the opinion behind the looking. She stopped at the edge of his clearing and spoke in English that was better than his.
I need shelter until the storm passes. Your lean-to is inadequate for one person. Allow me to stand beneath it, and I will share the dried venison in my pack.
Angus, a man who had spoken approximately 40 words in the previous week, all of them to a mule, looked at the woman, looked at the lean-to, looked at the storm, and began, without conscious decision, to build. Not improve the lean-to, build. Stripping bark from fresh-cut poles, lashing them with river willow cordage, creating a proper shelter in 40 minutes of furious, rain-soaked carpentry that was part hospitality and part the desperate energy of a lonely man given a reason to construct something for someone other than himself. She stayed. Not because she couldn't leave. The storm passed by midnight. She stayed because Angus's cooking was terrible and his company was better than his cooking, and because the lean-to he had built in the rain was genuinely impressive work. Tight-fitted, wind-resistant, the shelter of a man who understood wood the way a musician understands an instrument. She stayed 3 days, then 5, then 7. On the 8th day she mentioned, casually, in the way that someone drops a stone into water to see how deep the pool is, that her father's camp was expecting her return. Angus, who had spent 14 days in a state of mild panic at having a human being in his camp, a human being who spoke, who laughed, who expected conversation, heard the word return and discovered that being alone was no longer his preference. It was his habit. and habits can be broken. Don't go, or go, but come back. I'll build you a cabin, a real one, not a lean-to. Oak walls, a stone chimney, a door that latches, something worth coming back to. He built it in 3 weeks, a cabin that was, by any objective measure, the finest structure Angus Thorne had ever produced. Dovetail corner joints, no nails, a split-shake roof, a river stone fireplace with a flue that drew clean, a plank floor sanded smooth enough to walk barefoot. He built it the way a man writes a love letter, putting everything he couldn't say into the shape of the thing he could make. Blue Heron returned. She inspected the cabin with the professional eye of a woman whose own people built riverbank lodges of considerable sophistication. The Quapaw were not nomads. They were village builders, farmers, architects of permanent settlements.
The joints are tight, the chimney draws well, the door faces east, the correct direction. You built this for me. I accept it. My father will want to meet the man who builds homes the way our people build them, from the inside out, starting with what the family needs.
The White Settlement. The collection of timber cutters, traders, and hard-scrabble farmers who comprised the nearest white community noticed. The lumberman and the Quapaw woman. Tongues moved, opinions formed. Doors that had been open to Angus, trading doors, social doors, church doors, began to close with the particular finality of frontier morality, which could tolerate murder, theft, and alcoholism, but drew an iron line at interracial affection.
Angus, I buried my husband on this river. I know what it costs to love in this territory. What you're doing, the Indian woman, the cabin, it will cost you everything. Not because it's wrong, because people will make it cost everything.
The river fleet appeared on a Tuesday morning in late October, when the maples on the bluffs had turned crimson and the Arkansas ran smooth as hammered copper. 20 canoes, birch bark and dugout, paddled by Quapaw men and women, loaded with goods. They came around the bend in formation, spaced evenly, moving with the coordinated precision of a flotilla that had been organized for display. At the lead canoe, War Eagle, chief of the downstream Quapaw band, Blue Heron's father, a man of approximately 55, with a face carved by authority and a presence that filled a river the way his daughter's presence filled a clearing. The Dowry. In Quapaw tradition, a matrilineal society where women owned the lodge and men married into the woman's family, a marriage of significance was announced and validated by a gift fleet, canoes bearing the bride's clan's contribution to the new household. The scale of the fleet indicated the bride's status. 20 canoes indicated royalty. Blue Heron was not merely a Quapaw woman. She was a chief's daughter, and her father was arriving to inspect the man his daughter had chosen and to deliver the dowry that would bind the union in Quapaw law. Subscribe when 20 canoes arrive carrying a royal dowry and a chief's inspection reveals what this lumberman truly built. The cost of forbidden love will redefine everything about belonging. The fleet grounded on the riverbank. The canoes contained smoked elk, dried corn, tanned hides of exceptional quality, copper ornaments, woven blankets, carved pipes, and, in War Eagle's personal canoe, an oak war club inlaid with copper, the symbol of the clan's martial lineage.
From War Eagle. This woman is my daughter. She tells me you built her a home. I have come to see if the home is worthy, and if the man who built it is worthy of the woman inside it.
War Eagle inspected the cabin. He ran his hand along the dovetail joints. He tested the chimney flue. He examined the door hinges, iron, forged by Angus at the nearest blacksmith's anvil. He stood in the center of the single room and looked at Angus with an expression that was both assessment and grudging respect.
My home is well made. The joints speak of patience. The chimney speaks of foresight. The eastern door speaks of someone who has listened to my daughter, or to the spirits. I accept this home for my daughter. The fleet is her dowry. These goods are her contribution to the household. They come from her clan, not from you. In our way, the woman brings the wealth. The man brings the shelter. You have provided shelter. She provides everything else.
Angus stood in the clearing, surrounded by 20 canoes worth of Quapaw wealth, facing a chief who had just approved the marriage and felt simultaneously like the richest man on the Arkansas River and the most terrified. The white settlement's response was swift. Within a week of the fleet's arrival, 20 Quapaw canoes on the Arkansas had been impossible to miss. Angus Thorne was informed that his timber contracts were cancelled. The trading post refused his lumber. The church struck his name from the congregation register. The frontier community that had tolerated his eccentricities, the solitude, the talking to mules, drew the line at a Quapaw wife and a Quapaw father-in-law who arrived with a war club. Patience Sloan delivered the verdict with the gentleness of a woman who had predicted it.
I told you, Angus, not because it's wrong, because they'll make it cost everything. You're a white man with an Indian wife. In this settlement, that makes you neither white nor Indian. It makes you nothing.
The Quapaw response was more nuanced but equally painful. War Eagle accepted the marriage, had validated it with the Dowry fleet. But the Quapaw Council had reservations. A white man inside the clan structure introduced complications. Land claims, treaty obligations, the ever-present danger that a white husband would be used by the government as a lever against Quapaw sovereignty. Blue Heron was not shunned. She was watched. The loving surveillance of a community protecting itself against the historical pattern of white men who married native women and then claimed their land. The cost was too high. Not too high to pay. Angus and Blue Heron paid it daily for the rest of their lives. Too high to pay without wound. They lived in the cabin Angus built, using the dowry goods Blue Heron's clan provided, occupying a space between two worlds that neither world had constructed for them. Love is enough. That's what I believed. Love is not enough. Love is the foundation, but a foundation without walls is just a flat place where the rain hits you. We needed walls, acceptance, community, a place in somebody's world. We built the walls ourselves. They were lonelier walls than either of us expected. They built. Angus cut timber independently, selling to the railroad, which cared about board feet, not domestic arrangements. Blue Heron maintained the cabin, grew the garden with Quapaw agricultural knowledge. The three sisters, corn, beans, squash, and raised children who spoke Quapaw and English with equal fluency and belonged fully to neither world. War Eagle visited every autumn with a smaller fleet, not 20 canoes, but 5, carrying seasonal gifts and the quiet support of a father who had known the cost before his daughter chose to pay it. Subscribe. There's more Ranchers' Honor stories where love defied every boundary. More frontier tales where belonging cost everything both worlds demanded. And more Chronicles where the Wild West's truest homes were built between two worlds. Lumberman split log home for Quapaw stranger. River fleet brought royal dowry. Love was not enough. It was, however, all they had. They made it answer. The cabin stood. The marriage stood. The dovetail joints held without nails. The cost was real and permanent and paid in full every morning. The door faced east because Blue Heron said it should, and Angus listened. Listening, in the end, was the only architecture that mattered.